December 1879. A train from New York to Menlo Park, New Jersey, packed with reporters and financiers. They are traveling to see a demonstration that financiers are calling a fraud and scientists are calling impossible. When they arrive, they walk into a laboratory glowing with a light that has no flame, no wax, and no smoke. It is the exact moment 5,000 years of human history begin to end. The candle, the sole conqueror of human darkness since the dawn of civilization, was about to be dethroned. But the story of how we captured fire into a stick of wax is far darker and far stranger than you might think. It begins thousands of years ago with the smell of boiling animal fat. 3,000 years before the birth of Christ, in the river valleys of ancient Egypt and the walled cities of early Mesopotamia, the night was an impenetrable wall. The only light came from crude torches, burning sticks of wood dipped in pitch or resin. They were dangerous, smoky, and died quickly. The true birth of the candle required a specific technological leap. The Egyptians and Cretans figured out that you could take fibrous reeds, soak them in liquid fat, and let them harden. The fat would burn slowly, feeding the flame through the reed, which acted as a primitive wick. It was the first true candle. But the real engineering marvel belonged to the Romans. By 500 BC, Roman chandlers had perfected the modern candle. They created the first true wicks, braiding papyrus or flax so that it would bend over as it burned, allowing the tip to remain in the outer layer of the flame, vaporizing the fuel completely, and preventing the smoking, sputtering mess of a straight wick. For fuel, they boiled the fat of cattle and sheep, a substance called tallow. They did not know the word for lipids or combustion. They did not understand the molecular structure of a triglyceride, but they knew that if you boiled the animal waste at the right temperature, skimmed the impurities from the top, and repeatedly dipped a braided string into the liquid, it would harden into a stable, transportable, and reliable source of light. It was a chemical engineering masterpiece achieved through trial and error over centuries. The Roman legions marched with candles in their kits, using them to light the military camps that stretched from Britain to the Middle East. And here is where the story takes a turn. You see, tallow candles had one massive, unavoidable flaw. They smelled like a rendering plant on fire, and they left a thick, greasy soot on everything they touched. The Roman elite, living in their sprawling villas, could not stand the stench of burning beef fat in their dining rooms. They needed something cleaner, something that spoke of wealth and power. They found it in the secretions of a tiny insect. To understand the candle industry, you have to look at the ancient world's version of a luxury monopoly. In ancient China, and later in the Roman Empire, the ruling classes discovered that beeswax burned with a bright, clean flame and produced a sweet, honey-like scent. It was the ketchup of the ancient world, except it was more expensive than meat. In Rome, beeswax candles were so heavily associated with the gods that they became a religious requirement. The Emperor Constantine, in the early 4th century, ordered that beeswax candles be burned in every Christian church during the Easter Vigil. This single decree created a massive continent-wide demand that would last for over 1,000 years. The Catholic Church became the largest consumer of beeswax in the world. They needed it for vigils, for funerals, for daily mass. This demand built empires of trade. Beekeepers in the monasteries of medieval Europe held immense power because they controlled the only clean light source available. The church instituted a tax requiring every peasant to supply a certain amount of beeswax to their local parish every year. It was called the candle tax. If you did not pay, you were denied the sacraments. It was a brilliant system of control. The church had a monopoly on the divine, and the beeswax candle was the physical manifestation of that monopoly. But while the church was hoarding beeswax for the divine, the common people were left in the dark, literally. They had to rely on the tallow candle, or the rushlight, a reed dipped in fat that burned for 15 minutes and smelled like a slaughterhouse. The divide between the rich and the poor was measured in light, and that divide was about to create a crisis. The population of Europe was growing, the cities were expanding, and the demand for light was outstripping the supply of bees. Something had to give. In the 13th and 14th centuries, the European candlemakers organized themselves into powerful guilds. The tallow chandlers and the wax chandlers were strictly separated. Tallow chandlers were banished to the outskirts of the city because the smell of boiling cow and sheep fat was considered a public nuisance. They were the sanitation workers of the light industry. The wax chandlers were respectable, wealthy merchants who catered to the aristocracy and the clergy. But the whole system was facing a bottleneck. You can only breed so many bees in a cold European climate. The turning point came from the sea. In the late 18th century, the global whaling industry exploded. Ships from Nantucket and New England hunted sperm whales in the deep Pacific. When they cut open the head of a sperm whale, they found a massive organ filled with a pure, white, waxy substance. They called it spermaceti. It was a wax, but it was not made by insects. It was produced by the largest predator on Earth. Whale ships would harvest thousands of gallons of this liquid, haul it back to port, and sell it to candle makers. Spermaceti was the holy grail of lighting. It burned brighter than beeswax. It did not smell. It did not warp in the summer heat. It was the first major improvement in candle technology in over 2,000 years. This decision seemed small at the time. It was not. The demand for spermaceti turned the whaling industry into a global superpower. Ships spent years at sea, hunting the sperm whale to the edge of extinction. Also, the wealthy could read a book at night without smelling like a dead cow. But the obsession with clean light was just getting started, and the lengths humanity would go to keep the darkness at bay were about to get much darker. For most of human history, the candle was not just a tool. It was a boundary between the living and the dead. In medieval and early modern Europe, the night was a terrifying place. Without a candle, you were blind. With a candle, you were a target for thieves, demons, and the devil himself. Because candles were so precious, a whole culture of superstition grew up around them. If a candle went out suddenly, it meant death was near. If the wick burned blue, a ghost was in the room. In parts of Wales and England, there was the legend of the corpse candle. People claimed to see a small, flickering light moving through the woods at night. It was believed to be the spirit of a dying person, traveling the path they would take to the graveyard the next day. If you saw it, you did not follow it. You went home and locked your door. The candle was also a marker of deep social shame. In many towns, the local candle maker was treated almost like an undertaker. The tallow chandler handled dead animals, boiled their fat, and produced a product that everyone needed, but no one wanted to be near. There were strict laws in London about where a chandler could live. They had to be downstream, downwind, away from the respectable merchants. If the wind changed direction and the smell of rendering fat hit the market square, the chandler could be fined. The absurdity of the situation is staggering. Humanity had conquered the oceans, built cathedrals that touched the sky, and mapped the stars. But the only way we could see at night was by burning the fat of dead animals in our living rooms. And here is where the story gets dark. The demand for light was insatiable. The whaling ships were bringing back spermaceti, but it was never enough. The middle class was growing, and they wanted to read at night. The Industrial Revolution was beginning, and factories needed to run longer hours. The world was desperate for a cheap, clean, abundant source of wax. They found it, but the cost was measured in human lives. In the early 19th century, the candle industry went through a brutal chemical transformation. Chemists discovered that you could treat animal fats with sulfuric acid and heavy metals to purify them, removing the smell and the impurities. This process created stearin, a hard, white fat that burned cleanly and cheaply. It was a massive breakthrough, but the factories that produced stearin were nightmares. Workers stood over vats of boiling acid and fat, breathing in toxic fumes. Burns were a daily occurrence. The life expectancy of a candle factory worker in London in the 1840s was under 30 years. They were literally giving their lives to make cheap candles for the growing middle class. But the real turning point, the one that changed everything, came in 1850. A Scottish chemist named James Young figured out how to distill a clear, thin oil from a natural petroleum seep. He called it paraffin. It was the first truly scalable, dirt-cheap, clean-burning candle wax in history. Suddenly, everyone could afford light. The paraffin candle was a technological triumph. It was the end of the Dark Ages. People could work, read, and socialize long after the sun went down. The night was conquered. The candle industry exploded into a massive global business, churning out millions of cheap paraffin candles every week. For the first time in 5,000 years, humanity was not limited by the cost of light. But the victory was short-lived. The very same petroleum that James Young was distilling into paraffin was about to be refined into something else. Something that would burn brighter, cheaper, and without a flame. The clock was already running on the candle's 5,000-year reign. If you are finding this history interesting, subscribe to the channel. Here at Common Lore, we tell stories like this every week, and you will not want to miss what comes next. The candle did not just give us light. It literally reshaped human biology and society. Before the 19th century, humanity slept in 2 shifts. People would go to bed at dusk, wake up around midnight, read, pray, or visit neighbors for an hour or 2, and then go back to sleep until dawn. It was called segmented sleep. The cheap candle, especially the paraffin candle, killed this practice. With cheap light, people could stay up late. The Industrial Revolution demanded continuous labor. Factories ran shifts around the clock. The candle was the bridge between the agricultural world and the modern industrial world. It allowed the night shift to exist. But the candle also fueled a global conflict. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the British government levied a massive tax on glass and candles, just as they had on tea. The tax on candles was so high that it created a massive black market. Smugglers known as candle runners operated in the dark, selling illicit tallow candles to the poor. The government responded with extreme violence. Inspectors had the power to break into homes and confiscate candles. People were imprisoned for making their own candles. It was a tax on the night itself. And then there was the geopolitical impact. The reliance on whale oil for the best candles drove the American whaling industry to dominate the Pacific. Whaling ships were the oil tankers of their day. When the sperm whale population began to collapse, it triggered a global energy crisis. The price of light skyrocketed. The world was facing a future where only the rich could see at night. The pressure to find an alternative was immense, and the alternative was bubbling up from the ground in Pennsylvania. The invention of the kerosene lamp in the 1850s was the first crack in the candle's empire. Kerosene, distilled from crude oil, was cheaper than paraffin and burned much brighter. People threw their candles in the trash and bought kerosene lamps. The candle industry panicked. They tried to market candles as luxury items, as romantic accessories, but it was a losing battle. The final blow came in 1879. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. He invented the first commercially viable incandescent light bulb, and more importantly, the electrical grid to power it. When he turned on the lights in Menlo Park, the candle's 5,000-year monopoly on human light was over. The world went electric. The candle was relegated to emergencies, churches, and birthday cakes. But the candle did not die. It adapted. Today, the candle industry is worth over $10 billion globally. We burn over 1 billion pounds of wax every year. And this is the part that catches people off guard. We do not burn them for light anymore. We burn them for emotion. The modern candle is an air freshener, a relaxation tool, a status symbol. But the candle still has a vital, hidden role in the modern world. In space exploration, candles are used to test how fire spreads in zero gravity. In submarines, specialized chlorate candles are burned to generate emergency oxygen. They are literally keeping astronauts and sailors alive. The object that started as a burning reed in ancient Egypt is now a piece of aerospace engineering. But the most surprising use of the candle is in your own home. When you light a candle today, you are participating in a ritual that is older than recorded history. Think about that for a second. When you strike a match and touch it to the wick, you are repeating an action that a Roman legionary did in a British fort, that a medieval monk did in a dark scriptorium, that a sailor did on a whaling ship in the Pacific. The technology in your hand has not changed in over 150 years. The candle is a survivor. It was born in the mud of the Nile. It powered the Roman Empire. It built the Catholic Church. It drove men to hunt the largest creatures on Earth. It fueled the Industrial Revolution. It was taxed, smuggled, and fought over. And in 1879, in a laboratory in New Jersey, it was declared obsolete. But it is still here, sitting on your coffee table, waiting for the next power outage, or just waiting for a quiet evening. The light bulb may have conquered the night, but the candle conquered something else. It conquered our need for a small, controlled, intimate flame. A reminder that we are still the animal that tamed fire. 5,000 years of history, sitting in a glass jar, smelling like vanilla. If this story surprised you, subscribe to Common Lore and tell us in the comments which part of the candle's history surprised you the most. And leave your like so more people can find this video.